Your words either build empires or destroy them. Every time you open your mouth, you're either gaining respect or losing it. There's no middle ground. Most people have no idea that the way they speak is sabotaging their success, killing their influence, and ensuring they'll never be taken seriously as a leader. By the time you finish this, you will not speak the same way you do right now. That's not motivation. That's a biological fact. Your brain is about to rewire itself with the exact communication patterns that separate true leaders from everyone else. The difference between someone who commands a room and someone who gets ignored isn't talent, charisma, or luck. It's a learnable system of communication that 99% of people will never master because they think leadership is about position, not psychology. But you're about to discover the truth. Leadership isn't about what you do. It's about how you make people think, feel, and act through your words. Every great leader in history understood this secret. Now you will too. Chapter 1. The Leadership Communication Crisis. Here's the brutal reality most people refuse to accept. You are being judged within the first 7 seconds of opening your mouth. Not by what you say, but by how you say it. Your tonality, word choice, pace, and energy are sending signals to every person around you about whether you're someone worth following or someone to ignore. Most people fail this test before they even realize they're taking it. They speak like followers, think like followers, and wonder why they're treated like followers. They use weak language patterns that immediately telegraph to others that they lack authority, confidence, and the psychological framework of leadership. Let me destroy some myths right now. Leadership communication is not about being loud. It's not about dominating conversations. It's not about using big words or complex sentences. Those are the tactics of insecure people trying to compensate for their lack of genuine authority. Real leadership communication is about psychological positioning, strategic influence, and the ability to shape reality through language. The crisis is this. Most people communicate reactively. They respond to situations instead of creating them. They follow conversational threads instead of directing them. They ask for permission through their language instead of commanding respect. They speak from a position of weakness and wonder why they're perceived as weak. Here's what's happening in your brain when you speak without leadership consciousness. Your default neural pathways are programmed by years of social conditioning, fear-based thinking, and the desperate need to be liked rather than respected. Every time you say, "I think maybe we could possibly try," your brain is reinforcing a pattern of uncertainty. Every time you end statements like questions, your brain is training itself to seek approval rather than command attention. This is why most people's communication gets worse over time, not better. They're practicing the wrong patterns thousands of times per day. They're literally rewiring their brains for weakness, hesitation, and follower mentality. Without conscious intervention, this pattern will continue until they become completely invisible in rooms full of people who could change their life. But here's the game-changing truth. Leadership communication is not a personality trait. It's a skill system. Every element can be learned, practiced, and mastered. The psychological frameworks that create authority, the language patterns that generate influence, the tonality shifts that command respect, all of it can be developed by anyone willing to commit to the process. The leaders you see who seem to have natural charisma They've simply internalized these systems so deeply that they operate automatically. They've rewired their neural pathways to default to authority instead of insecurity. They've trained their subconscious mind to communicate from a position of strength, regardless of the external situation. This transformation doesn't happen by accident. It requires deliberate practice, conscious awareness, and the willingness to abandon communication patterns that have kept you safe but small. Most people will never do this work because it forces them to confront how their current way of speaking has been limiting their potential for years. The question is not whether you can learn to talk like a leader. The question is whether you're willing to stop talking like a follower. Because the moment you make that decision, everything changes. Your presence shifts. People respond to you differently. Opportunities appear that were invisible before. You stop asking for permission and start creating the reality you want. Chapter 2. The Authority Voice Formula. Authority is not something you have. It's something you create through every single word you speak. Most people think authority comes from position, title, or external validation. They're wrong. Authority comes from the psychological positioning you establish through your communication patterns. It's about training other people's subconscious minds to perceive you as someone worth listening to, following, and respecting. The Authority Voice Formula is built on 5 foundational pillars that separate leaders from followers at the neurological level. These aren't speaking tips or communication tricks. These are psychological principles that tap into the deepest patterns of human behavior and social hierarchy. Pillar 1 is certainty architecture. Leaders don't speak in possibilities, they speak in inevitabilities. While everyone else is saying, "I think we might be able to," leaders are saying, "We will accomplish this by implementing these specific steps." The difference isn't just semantic, it's neurological. When you speak with certainty, you're activating the confidence centers in other people's brains. You're literally rewiring their neural networks to associate your voice with competence and reliability. But certainty without substance is just arrogance. Real certainty comes from deep preparation, strategic thinking, and the ability to see outcomes that others miss. Leaders develop this by constantly expanding their knowledge, studying patterns, and building frameworks that allow them to predict results with accuracy. They earn the right to speak with certainty by doing the work that certainty requires. Pillar 2 is declarative dominance. Leaders make statements while followers ask questions. This doesn't mean never asking questions. It means understanding when to gather information and when to provide direction. Most people ask questions when they should be making declarations because they're afraid of being wrong. Leaders make declarations because they understand that leadership requires taking positions and defending them with evidence and logic. Declarative dominance means replacing, "Do you think we should try this approach?" with, "We're implementing this approach because it addresses our 3 core challenges." It means shifting from, "What if this doesn't work?" to, "When this succeeds, we'll expand the model to other departments." The psychological impact is immediate. People stop questioning your competence and start looking to you for answers. Pillar 3 is emotional regulation through tonality. Your voice is a psychological instrument that either creates calm confidence or transmits anxiety and uncertainty. Leaders understand that their emotional state becomes the emotional state of everyone around them. If you're speaking from a place of stress, that stress infects every person in the room. If you're speaking from a place of centered confidence, that confidence becomes contagious. Emotional regulation isn't about suppressing emotions. It's about channeling them strategically. Anger becomes focused determination. Frustration becomes problem-solving energy. Excitement becomes inspiring vision. Leaders don't let emotions control their voice. They use their voice to shape emotions in themselves and others. Pillar 4 is strategic pacing and pause power. Most people speak too quickly because they're afraid of losing attention or being interrupted. This creates the exact outcome they're trying to avoid. Rapid speech signals anxiety and uncertainty. Leaders understand that confidence speaks slowly because confidence isn't worried about being interrupted. Strategic pacing means allowing your words to land before moving to the next thought. It means using pauses to create emphasis, build tension, and allow important concepts to penetrate deeply into people's consciousness. When you slow down your speech and add intentional pauses, you force others to pay closer attention. You create space for your ideas to be fully processed and internalized. Pillar 5 is value-first communication. Leaders don't speak to fill silence or to hear themselves talk. They speak to add value, provide clarity, or move situations forward. Every word serves a purpose. Every sentence advances an objective. This means eliminating filler words, meaningless small talk, and the verbal clutter that dilutes your message and weakens your impact. Value-first communication requires preparation. Before entering any important conversation, leaders know what outcome they want to create, what value they want to provide, and what next steps they want to establish. They don't wing it and hope for the best. They architect conversations to achieve specific results. When you combine these 5 pillars, something remarkable happens. Your communication becomes magnetically different from 99% of people around you. People start seeking your opinion, deferring to your judgment, and looking to you for leadership in situations where you have no official authority. This isn't manipulation. It's the natural result of communicating from a foundation of genuine competence and authentic confidence. Chapter 3. Strategic silence and pause power. Silence is the most underestimated weapon in leadership communication. While everyone else is desperately filling every moment with words, leaders understand that what you don't say is often more powerful than what you do say. Strategic silence creates psychological space that forces others to reveal their true thoughts, motivations, and positions. Most people are terrified of silence. They experience it as awkwardness, pressure, or social failure. This fear drives them to talk when they should listen, to respond when they should reflect, and to fill space when they should create tension. Leaders have rewired their brains to experience silence as opportunity, not anxiety. The psychology of silence operates on multiple levels simultaneously. At the cognitive level, silence forces people to process what has just been said more deeply. When you make a statement and then pause, you're giving the other person's brain time to fully absorb your message. Without this processing time, your words often get lost in the mental noise of preparing their response. At the emotional level, silence creates a form of productive tension that motivates action. When you ask a powerful question and then remain silent, you're putting gentle pressure on the other person to provide a thoughtful answer. Most people will fill this space with more honesty and insight than they originally intended to share. At the social level, silence demonstrates confidence and self-control. People who are comfortable with silence signal that they don't need constant validation or attention. They're not afraid of their own thoughts or the thoughts of others. This comfort with silence is interpreted as leadership, maturity, and emotional strength. There are 5 specific applications of strategic silence that separate leader-level communicators from everyone else. The first is the post-statement pause. After making an important point, leaders pause for 3 to 5 seconds to allow the message to penetrate. This pause says, "What I just shared is significant enough to deserve your full consideration." It forces attention and creates emphasis without raising your voice or adding dramatic language. The second application is the question-response gap. When someone asks you a question, especially a challenging or complex one, resist the urge to respond immediately. Take 3 to 7 seconds to consider your answer. This accomplishes multiple objectives. It demonstrates that you take their questions seriously. It gives you time to formulate a more thoughtful response. And it signals that you're not reactive or defensive. The third application is strategic non-response. Sometimes the most powerful response to a statement or question is no response at all. When someone makes a comment designed to provoke, distract, or derail a conversation, leaders often choose silence instead of engagement. This refusal to take the bait demonstrates emotional regulation and keeps the conversation focused on what matters. The fourth application is the listening pause. During complex discussions or negotiations, leaders periodically pause the conversation to create space for others to contribute. Let me pause here and get your thoughts on what I've outlined so far. This technique accomplishes several things. It demonstrates respect for others' perspectives. It provides valuable feedback on how your message is being received, and it prevents you from over-talking your position. The fifth application is the decision pause. When faced with requests for immediate decisions or responses, leaders often say, "Let me think about that," and get back to you with a complete answer. This pause prevents reactive decisions that they might regret later and signals that important matters deserve careful consideration. Mastering pause power requires retraining your nervous system's response to silence. Most people experience silence as pressure that must be relieved through speech. Leaders experience silence as space that can be filled strategically or left empty for maximum impact. This shift happens through deliberate practice and conscious rewiring of social anxiety patterns. The key is to start with shorter pauses in low-stakes situations and gradually build your comfort with longer periods of silence. Practice making statements and counting to 3 before continuing. Ask questions and resist the urge to rephrase or elaborate immediately. Allow others to fill the silence with their thoughts, instead of filling it with more of your words. Advanced silence techniques include the contemplative pause, where you visibly consider what someone has said before responding, and the strategic redirect, where you use silence to allow an unproductive line of conversation to die naturally before introducing a new direction. When you master strategic silence, your words gain exponentially more impact because people know you don't waste them. They learn to pay closer attention when you speak because your communication is intentional rather than compulsive. This attention becomes influence, and influence becomes leadership. Chapter 4. Framing reality through words. Language doesn't just describe reality. It creates reality. Every word you choose, every frame you establish, every narrative you construct is actively shaping how others perceive situations, possibilities, and themselves. Leaders understand this power and use it responsibly to create positive outcomes, build confidence, and generate momentum toward shared objectives. Framing is the psychological architecture that determines how information is interpreted and what emotions are triggered in response. The same facts presented through different frames will create completely different responses. A project delay can be framed as a failure or as an opportunity to improve quality. A budget cut can be framed as a limitation or as a challenge to optimize efficiency. The facts don't change, but the meaning changes everything. Most people frame reactively, unconsciously adopting whatever emotional or psychological frame is presented to them by others. Leaders frame proactively, consciously choosing frames that serve their objectives and the well-being of everyone involved. This doesn't mean manipulating or lying. It means taking responsibility for the psychological environment you create through your communication choices. The foundation of strategic framing is outcome orientation. Before entering any conversation, leaders know what emotional state, mental framework, and action steps they want to create through their communication. They don't just react to whatever frame others bring. They actively establish frames that move situations toward positive resolution. There are 7 core framing strategies that separate leadership communication from follower communication. The first is possibility framing versus problem framing. When faced with challenges, most people immediately frame the situation around what's wrong, what's not working, and what obstacles exist. Leaders acknowledge these realities, but frame conversations around what's possible, what resources are available, and what steps can be taken to create solutions. Possibility framing doesn't ignore problems. It positions them as solvable challenges rather than permanent limitations. We have a significant budget shortfall becomes we have an opportunity to identify our highest value activities and invest our resources more strategically. The facts remain the same, but the frame creates energy for action rather than paralysis from overwhelm. The second strategy is growth framing versus fixed framing. Fixed framing treats abilities, resources, and circumstances as permanent. Growth framing treats everything as developable, expandable, and improvable. When team members make mistakes, leaders frame these as learning opportunities rather than character flaws. When facing resource constraints, leaders frame these as creativity catalysts rather than success barriers. The third strategy is agency framing versus victim framing. Victim framing focuses on external circumstances, other people's actions, and factors beyond our control. Agency framing focuses on available choices, possible actions, and areas where we can influence outcomes. Leaders consistently redirect conversations from what's happening to us toward what we can do about it. The fourth strategy is collaboration framing versus competition framing. Competition framing positions people and groups against each other in win-lose scenarios. Collaboration framing positions challenges as external problems that require collective action to solve. Instead of our department versus their department, leaders frame situations as our organization against external challenges. The fifth strategy is learning framing versus judgment framing. Judgment framing categorizes people and situations as good or bad, right or wrong, successful or failed. Learning framing treats every outcome as information that can improve future decisions. When projects don't achieve expected results, leaders frame these as data points that inform better strategies rather than evidence of incompetence. The sixth strategy is abundance framing versus scarcity framing. Scarcity framing operates from assumptions of limited resources, zero-sum competition, and not enough for everyone. Abundance framing operates from assumptions of creative possibilities, expanding opportunities, and multiple paths to success. Leaders help others see possibilities that scarcity thinking makes invisible. The seventh strategy is value framing versus cost framing. Cost framing focuses on what must be given up, invested, or risked. Value framing focuses on what will be gained, achieved, or created. When proposing new initiatives, leaders don't ignore costs, but they frame conversations around value creation rather than resource consumption. Advanced framing requires understanding the psychological triggers that activate different emotional and mental states in others. Hope is triggered by framing that connects current actions to meaningful future outcomes. Confidence is triggered by framing that emphasizes available resources and past successes. Urgency is triggered by framing that highlights the cost of inaction and the benefits of immediate movement. The most powerful framing technique is future-present bridging, where you help others see how current decisions and actions directly connect to their desired future outcomes. This creates psychological alignment between immediate effort and long-term vision, making difficult tasks feel meaningful rather than burdensome. Leaders also master reframing, the ability to take someone else's negative frame and transform it into a constructive one without dismissing their concerns or experiences. This requires acknowledging their perspective before offering an alternative way of looking at the situation that opens up new possibilities for positive action. Chapter 5. The Psychology of Influence and Persuasion. Influence is not about convincing people to do what you want. It's about helping them want what's genuinely best for themselves and the collective good. True leadership influence operates through psychological principles that create authentic alignment rather than forced compliance. When you understand how human decision-making actually works, you can communicate in ways that naturally generate enthusiasm and commitment. The foundation of ethical influence is understanding that all human decisions are emotional decisions justified by logical reasoning. People don't analyze options rationally and then choose the best one. They feel drawn to certain options and then construct logical arguments to support what they already want to do. Leaders who ignore this reality waste enormous amounts of energy trying to convince people through logic alone. Emotional decision-making isn't a flaw to overcome. It's a feature to understand and work with respectfully. Emotions are sophisticated information processing systems that evaluate complex situations faster than conscious analysis. Fear protects us from danger. Excitement motivates us toward opportunity. Anger signals that something important is being threatened. Leaders learn to speak to both the emotional and logical systems simultaneously. The first principle of influence psychology is reciprocity activation. Humans have a deep biological drive to return favors and match the energy they receive from others. When you provide value before asking for anything in return, you create psychological momentum toward cooperation. But this must be genuine value, not manipulative gestures designed to create obligation. Reciprocity activation means leading with contribution rather than request. Share insights that help others succeed. Offer resources that solve their problems. Provide recognition that validates their efforts. Create opportunities that advance their objectives. This pattern programs their subconscious mind to associate you with positive outcomes and makes them naturally inclined to support your initiatives. The second principle is social proof amplification. People don't decide what's appropriate, valuable, or necessary by analyzing abstract principles. They look at what others are doing, especially others they respect or identify with. Leaders understand this and strategically share examples of how similar people have succeeded using similar approaches. Social proof amplification isn't about name-dropping or false claims. It's about helping others see that the path you're suggesting has been successfully traveled by people they can relate to. Companies similar to ours have improved efficiency by 30%. Using this framework is more persuasive than abstract explanations of why the framework should work. The third principle is scarcity and urgency ethics. Humans are biologically programmed to prioritize opportunities that appear limited or time-sensitive. This isn't manipulation. It's accurate communication about reality. Most valuable opportunities do have time limits. Most resources are genuinely limited. Most windows of possibility do close if not acted upon promptly. Ethical scarcity communication means honestly representing the constraints and opportunities that actually exist. If a decision needs to be made by Friday to meet a project deadline, communicate that reality clearly. If budget allocations are being determined this quarter, help others understand what's at stake. Never create false urgency, but don't downplay genuine time sensitivity either. The fourth principle is commitment and consistency leverage. People have a powerful psychological drive to remain consistent with commitments they've made, especially commitments they've made publicly or put in writing. Leaders use this principle by helping others articulate their own goals, values, and desired outcomes, then connecting proposed actions to those self-stated commitments. Instead of telling someone what they should do, guide them to explain what they want to achieve and why it matters to them. Then help them see how your suggested approach connects to their stated objectives. This creates internal alignment rather than external pressure. The fifth principle is authority positioning through competence demonstration. People naturally defer to those who demonstrate genuine expertise, experience, and successful track records. But authority can't be claimed. It must be demonstrated through knowledge, results, and the ability to solve problems others can't solve. Authority positioning means consistently providing insights that prove valuable, making predictions that prove accurate, and offering solutions that prove effective. Over time, this builds a reputation for competence that makes your words carry more weight in every conversation. The sixth principle is likability through authentic connection. People are more easily influenced by those they like, trust, and feel understood by. But likability can't be faked through superficial charm. It develops through genuine interest in others' success, consistent reliability, and the ability to find common ground while maintaining your own principles. The seventh principle is rational justification support. Even though decisions are made emotionally, people need logical reasons to feel good about their choices. Leaders provide these reasons by connecting emotional desires to rational benefits, statistical evidence, and strategic advantages. Advanced influence requires reading the psychological state of your audience and adapting your approach accordingly. Some people need time to process. Others need peer validation. Some respond to challenge, while others need reassurance. The most influential leaders develop flexibility in their communication style, while maintaining consistency in their core message. The ultimate goal of influence is not compliance but genuine enthusiasm. When you help people see how your suggested course of action serves their authentic interests and values, they don't just agree to participate, they become advocates who help others see the value as well. This creates exponential influence that extends far beyond your direct communication. Chapter 6. Mastering difficult conversations and conflict resolution. Most people avoid difficult conversations until they become impossible situations. They let problems fester, allow resentment to build, and watch relationships deteriorate because they lack the communication frameworks to navigate conflict constructively. Leaders understand that difficult conversations are not obstacles to avoid. They are opportunities to strengthen relationships, solve problems, and demonstrate emotional maturity. The psychology of conflict avoidance runs deeper than most people realize. Your brain is wired to interpret disagreement as social threat, triggering fight or flight responses that cloud judgment and escalate tension. When someone challenges your ideas or expresses frustration with your decisions, ancient survival circuits activate as if you were facing physical danger. This is why most people either become aggressive and defensive or withdraw and shut down when conflicts arise. Leaders have rewired their nervous systems to remain calm and strategic during conflict. They've trained their brains to interpret disagreement as information rather than attack, and opposition as puzzle to solve rather than enemy to defeat. This neural rewiring doesn't happen automatically. It requires deliberate practice and conscious cultivation of emotional regulation skills. The first framework for conflict mastery is emotional state management. Before entering any difficult conversation, leaders ensure they're operating from a state of centered confidence rather than reactive emotion. This means taking time to process your own feelings privately before attempting to address the situation with others. If you're angry, frustrated, or defensive, your emotional state will contaminate the conversation and prevent productive resolution. Emotional state management includes physical preparation. Difficult conversations require more mental energy than normal interactions, so leaders ensure they're well rested, properly nourished, and physically relaxed before engaging. They also choose timing strategically, avoiding conversations when either party is stressed, rushed, or distracted by other concerns. The second framework is perspective preparation. Before addressing conflict, leaders invest time understanding the other person's viewpoint, motivations, and underlying concerns. This isn't about agreeing with their position. It's about developing genuine comprehension of how they see the situation. When people feel understood, they become exponentially more willing to listen and collaborate towards solutions. Perspective preparation means asking yourself specific questions. What legitimate concerns might be driving their behavior? What pressures or constraints might they be facing that I'm not aware of? What past experiences might be influencing their current reactions? How might my actions have contributed to this situation? This preparation prevents you from entering the conversation with a one-sided narrative that blocks mutual understanding. The third framework is outcome orientation. Most people approach difficult conversations focused on who's right, who's wrong, and who needs to apologize. Leaders approach these conversations focused on what outcomes will serve everyone's legitimate interests. They ask what needs to be true at the end of this conversation for both parties to feel respected and for the underlying issues to be genuinely resolved. Outcome orientation requires shifting from position-based thinking to interest-based thinking. Positions are what people say they want. Interests are why they want it. When you focus on underlying interests rather than stated positions, creative solutions become possible that satisfy everyone's core needs, even when their initial positions seemed incompatible. The fourth framework is strategic vulnerability. Conflict resolution requires someone to take the first step toward openness and collaboration. Leaders often choose to model this vulnerability by acknowledging their own contributions to the problem and expressing genuine interest in understanding the other person's experience. This vulnerability isn't weakness. It's strategic courage that invites reciprocal openness. Strategic vulnerability means owning your part of the problem without taking responsibility for everything. I realize my decision to implement this change without consulting your team created frustration and additional work. Help me understand the specific impacts so we can address them effectively. This approach disarms defensiveness and creates space for productive dialogue. The fifth framework is solution-focused dialogue structure. Effective conflict conversations follow a specific sequence that prevents emotional escalation and maintains focus on resolution. First, acknowledge the other person's perspective and validate their feelings. Second, share your own perspective without attacking theirs. Third, identify shared interests and common ground. Fourth, brainstorm multiple solution options together. Fifth, agree on specific next steps and accountability measures. Advanced conflict resolution requires understanding the psychological dynamics that drive most interpersonal tensions. Many conflicts are not really about the surface issues being discussed. They're about deeper needs for respect, autonomy, recognition, or security. When you can identify and address these underlying needs, surface conflicts often resolve naturally. One of the most powerful conflict resolution techniques is the empathy bridge, where you demonstrate understanding of the other person's position so clearly that they feel heard and validated before you share your perspective. It sounds like you're frustrated because the new process is requiring twice as much documentation time, and you're already working longer hours than you want to. Is that accurate? This validation creates psychological safety that makes collaborative problem-solving possible. Another advanced technique is future-focused framing, where you help both parties visualize what successful resolution would look like and work backward to identify the steps needed to get there. What would need to be true 6 months from now for both of us to feel good about how we've handled this situation? This technique shifts focus from past blame to future solutions. Leaders also master the art of de-escalation when conversations become heated. This involves lowering your voice tone when others raise theirs, slowing down your speech pattern when others speak rapidly, and introducing longer pauses when others become reactive. These techniques activate mirror neurons that help calm the other person's nervous system. The ultimate goal of difficult conversations is not just to resolve immediate problems, but to strengthen relationships and build trust for future challenges. When conflicts are handled with skill, respect, and genuine care for everyone's well-being, they actually create deeper connection and mutual respect than existed before the conflict arose. Chapter 7. Building Consensus and Driving Decision-Making. Consensus is not about everyone agreeing. It's about everyone committing to support decisions even when they have reservations. Most people confuse consensus with unanimity and waste enormous amounts of time trying to get everyone to see things the same way. Leaders understand that building consensus is about creating psychological buy-in through inclusive process, not identical opinions through extended debate. The psychology of consensus building operates on the principle of procedural justice. People are more willing to accept outcomes they disagree with if they believe the decision-making process was fair, transparent, and included their input. This means the way you facilitate discussions and make decisions is often more important than the specific decisions you make. Most meetings fail because they lack clear decision-making frameworks. People spend hours discussing problems without ever defining what kind of decision needs to be made, who has authority to make it, what criteria will be used to evaluate options, or what timeline guides the process. This ambiguity creates frustration, wasted time, and poor decisions that lack commitment from those who must implement them. The first principle of consensus building is decision architecture. Before any discussion begins, leaders establish clear frameworks that define the decision type, decision authority, evaluation criteria, and implementation requirements. Is this decision seeking input, advice, or approval? Who has final decision authority? What criteria will determine the best option? What resources and timeline constrain implementation? Decision architecture prevents the most common meeting failures where discussions become circular because participants don't understand what kind of decision they're trying to make or what role their input will play in the final outcome. When people understand the process, they can participate more effectively and feel more confident that their contributions matter. The second principle is structured input gathering. Rather than open-ended discussions that allow the loudest voices to dominate, leaders use specific techniques to ensure all relevant perspectives are heard and considered. This includes round-robin sharing, where everyone contributes before anyone responds. Anonymous input collection, where people can share concerns without social pressure, and small group breakouts that allow introverted participants to process thoughts before large group sharing. Structured input gathering also involves asking specific questions that elicit useful information rather than general opinions. Instead of, "What do you think about this proposal?" leaders ask, "What potential implementation challenges do you see?" and "What additional resources would be needed for success?" and "How would this impact your current priorities?" These questions generate actionable information rather than abstract commentary. The third principle is tension normalization. Most people try to eliminate disagreement and tension during decision-making processes because they experience conflict as evidence that something is wrong. Leaders understand that tension between competing priorities, limited resources, and different perspectives is normal and valuable. The goal is not to eliminate tension, but to harness it for better decisions. Tension normalization means explicitly acknowledging competing interests and trade-offs, rather than pretending they don't exist. We have a fundamental tension between speed and quality here, and any decision we make will involve trade-offs. Let's examine both sides clearly so we can make intentional choices about what to optimize for. This honesty creates trust and prevents unrealistic expectations about perfect solutions. The fourth principle is commitment calibration. After decisions are made, leaders ensure that everyone understands what specific actions they're committing to support even if they preferred different options. This involves explicit discussion of implementation requirements, resource allocations, communication responsibilities, and success metrics. Commitment calibration addresses the gap between intellectual agreement and behavioral follow-through. People might nod their heads during meetings but fail to prioritize implementation tasks because they don't feel genuinely invested in outcomes they didn't prefer. Leaders bridge this gap by connecting individual roles to collective success and helping people find personal motivation for supporting group decisions. The fifth principle is dissent integration. Rather than discouraging disagreement, leaders actively seek out minority opinions and worst-case scenario analysis. They ask questions like, "What are we not considering?" and "What could go wrong with this approach?" and "Who would be most negatively affected by this decision?" This integration of dissent leads to more robust decisions and prevents groupthink disasters. Advanced consensus building requires understanding the psychological profiles of different decision-making styles. Analytical thinkers need data and logical frameworks. Relationship-oriented people need to understand human impacts. Action-oriented individuals need clear implementation timelines. Visionary types need to see long-term possibilities. Effective leaders adapt their communication style to address all these perspectives during decision processes. One powerful technique is the pre-mortem analysis, where teams imagine that their decision has failed 6 months in the future and work backward to identify what could have gone wrong. This exercise surfaces hidden risks and implementation challenges while there's still time to address them proactively. Another advanced technique is stakeholder impact mapping, where decisions are evaluated based on their effects on all relevant parties, not just direct participants. This broader perspective often reveals creative solutions that satisfy more interests and generate wider support for implementation. Leaders also master the art of decision timing, understanding when to push for resolution and when to allow more processing time. Some decisions benefit from quick action and iterative improvement. Others require extensive analysis and stakeholder input. Forcing quick decisions when deliberation is needed creates poor outcomes and resentment. Allowing endless discussion when action is required creates paralysis and missed opportunities. The ultimate goal of consensus building is not just better decisions, but stronger teams that trust each other's judgment and feel invested in collective success. When people experience decision processes as fair, inclusive, and effective, they become more willing to participate constructively in future challenges. Chapter 8. Emotional Regulation and Stress Communication. Your emotional state is contagious. Every person you interact with absorbs and mirrors your internal energy, whether you realize it or not. When you're anxious, stressed, or overwhelmed, these emotions spread through your voice tone, body language, and word choices, creating anxiety and stress in everyone around you. Leaders understand this emotional contagion and take responsibility for managing their internal state as a form of service to others. Most people think emotional regulation is about controlling their feelings or suppressing negative emotions. This approach fails because emotions are information systems that help you navigate complex situations. Suppressing emotions doesn't eliminate them. It drives them underground where they influence your behavior in unconscious ways. Real emotional regulation is about experiencing emotions fully while choosing conscious responses rather than reactive behaviors. The neuroscience of stress communication reveals why emotional regulation is essential for leadership effectiveness. When your nervous system is activated by stress, your prefrontal cortex goes offline, reducing your ability to think strategically, communicate clearly, and make good decisions. This stress state is immediately detectable by others through micro-expressions, voice fluctuations, and behavioral changes, triggering defensive responses that make collaboration and influence nearly impossible. The first framework for emotional regulation is state awareness development. Most people are unconscious of their emotional states until they're overwhelmed by them. Leaders develop the ability to recognize emotional shifts early, when they still have maximum choice about how to respond. This requires regular internal check-ins throughout the day, asking yourself how you're feeling physically, emotionally, and mentally. State awareness includes understanding your personal stress triggers and early warning signals. Some people experience stress through physical tension in shoulders or jaw. Others notice changes in breathing patterns or digestive function. Some people become mentally scattered, while others become hyper-focused. Identifying your unique stress signature allows you to implement regulation strategies before stress impacts your communication effectiveness. The second framework is physiological reset techniques. Since emotion and physiology are interconnected systems, you can shift emotional states through intentional changes to breathing, posture, and movement patterns. Deep, diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system, promoting calm alertness. Progressive muscle relaxation releases physical tension that perpetuates stress. Brief walking breaks reset mental clarity and emotional balance. Advanced physiological regulation includes heart rate variability training, where you learn to create coherent patterns between heart rate and breathing that optimize both emotional stability and cognitive performance. This technique can be learned through biofeedback devices or simple breathing exercises that maintain specific ratios between inhalation and exhalation. The third framework is cognitive reframing under pressure. Stress often results from mental stories about what situations mean, what might happen, or what others are thinking. Leaders learn to identify stress-generating thought patterns and replace them with more accurate, helpful interpretations that support effective action rather than emotional reactivity. Cognitive reframing includes perspective-taking exercises where you consciously consider alternative explanations for challenging situations. If someone seems critical during a meeting, they might be under deadline pressure rather than personally attacking you. If a project faces unexpected obstacles, this might be valuable learning opportunity rather than evidence of incompetence. These alternative frames reduce stress and open up more creative response options. The fourth framework is strategic emotional expression. Emotional regulation doesn't mean emotional suppression. Leaders learn when and how to express emotions in ways that serve the situation and relationships involved. Sometimes expressing genuine concern motivates others to take problems seriously. Sometimes sharing excitement generates enthusiasm for new opportunities. The key is choosing expression strategically rather than being controlled by emotional impulses. Strategic emotional expression includes matching your emotional energy to situational needs. Crisis situations often require calm, steady energy that reassures others and promotes clear thinking. Creative brainstorming sessions benefit from higher energy and enthusiasm that encourages risk-taking and innovation. Difficult feedback conversations need compassionate but direct energy that maintains respect while addressing problems clearly. The fifth framework is stress communication protocols. When you are experiencing stress that might affect your communication, leaders have specific strategies for maintaining effectiveness while managing internal challenges. This includes acknowledging stress when appropriate, adjusting communication timelines when possible, and using support systems to process emotions privately before engaging in important conversations. Stress communication protocols also include recognizing when to postpone difficult conversations until you can engage from a more regulated state. Attempting to address complex issues when you're overwhelmed often creates more problems than it solves. Leaders develop the self-awareness to recognize when they need processing time and the courage to ask for it. Advanced emotional regulation requires understanding the relationship between stress and communication patterns. Under stress, people often talk faster, use more absolute language, interrupt more frequently, and struggle to listen effectively. Leaders monitor these communication changes as early warning signals that emotional regulation strategies are needed. One powerful technique is the emotional weather report, where you briefly acknowledge your internal state to others when it might affect the interaction. I'm feeling some frustration about this situation, and I want to make sure that doesn't interfere with our ability to solve it together. This transparency prevents others from personalizing your emotional energy and demonstrates emotional intelligence that builds trust. Another advanced technique is stress inoculation, where you deliberately practice emotional regulation skills in low-stakes situations, so they're available during high-pressure moments. Just like physical fitness, emotional regulation requires regular exercise to maintain effectiveness when it matters most. Leaders also learn to recognize and respond appropriately to stress in others. When team members are overwhelmed, pushing them for quick decisions or additional commitments often backfires. Instead, helping them regulate their emotional state first creates conditions for more effective communication and better decision-making. Chapter 9. Vision casting and inspirational messaging. Vision is not just about what you want to achieve. It's about creating a future so compelling that others willingly invest their time, energy, and resources to make it reality. Most people share goals and objectives but fail to cast vision because they describe destinations without creating emotional connection to the journey. Leaders understand that inspiration is not about logical benefits. It's about touching people's deepest desires for meaning, contribution, and transcendence. The psychology of inspiration operates through specific neurochemical pathways that create motivation and sustained effort. When people connect emotionally to meaningful outcomes, their brains release dopamine, norepinephrine, and other neurochemicals that increase focus, persistence, and creative problem-solving. This biochemical response is what separates inspired teams that achieve extraordinary results from ordinary teams that deliver mediocre performance. Most vision communication fails because leaders focus on what they want to accomplish rather than why it matters to the people whose support they need. They describe features instead of benefits, processes instead of outcomes, and organizational objectives instead of personal meaning. Effective vision casting requires understanding what genuinely motivates each audience and connecting your objectives to their authentic interests and values. The first principle of vision casting is future-present connection. Inspirational messaging helps people see clear links between current actions and meaningful future outcomes. This requires painting specific, sensory-rich pictures of what success will look like and feel like, not just abstract descriptions of improved metrics or achieved goals. Future-present connection means describing the experience of achievement, not just the fact of achievement. Instead of, "We will increase market share by 15%, leaders say, "Our customers will experience such exceptional service that they become our most enthusiastic advocates, bringing us referrals because they can't imagine working with anyone else." This emotional specificity creates psychological momentum toward action. The second principle is personal relevance integration. People don't invest deeply in abstract organizational objectives. They invest in opportunities to grow, contribute, and achieve outcomes that matter to them personally. Effective vision casting helps each person see how collective success serves their individual aspirations for professional development, financial security, creative expression, or social impact. Personal relevance integration requires knowing your audience's individual motivations and career objectives. Some people are driven by mastery and skill development. Others want recognition and advancement opportunities. Some seek work-life balance, while others crave challenge and achievement. Leaders adapt their vision messaging to highlight the aspects that resonate most powerfully with each person's core motivations. The third principle is obstacle acknowledgement with solution confidence. Inspirational messaging doesn't ignore challenges or pretend that success will be easy. Instead, it acknowledges real obstacles while expressing confident conviction that these challenges can be overcome through intelligent strategy and sustained effort. This balanced approach builds credibility while maintaining optimism. Obstacle acknowledgement means specifically naming the difficulties that everyone knows exist, rather than glossing over them with false positivity. This transformation will require learning new skills, changing established workflows, and investing significant time and energy. It will be challenging, and some days will be frustrating, but the capability we'll build and the results we'll achieve will justify every bit of effort we invest. This honesty creates trust that supports long-term commitment. The fourth principle is collective agency emphasis. The most inspiring visions help people see themselves as essential contributors to meaningful outcomes rather than passive recipients of changes decided by others. This means using we language instead of you language and describing shared ownership of both challenges and successes. Collective agency emphasis includes specific role clarification that helps each person understand how their unique contributions fit into the larger success story. People need to see not just that their work matters, but exactly how their work matters and why their specific skills and perspectives are necessary for achieving the vision. The fifth principle is values alignment demonstration. People invest most deeply in objectives that align with their core values and identity. Effective vision casting explicitly connects proposed outcomes to shared values like excellence, integrity, innovation, service, or justice. This alignment creates intrinsic motivation that sustains effort through inevitable difficulties and setbacks. Values alignment demonstration requires understanding which values are genuinely shared within your organization or team, not just which values are listed on websites or posters. Real values are revealed through what behaviors are rewarded, what decisions are prioritized, and what trade-offs are made when values conflict. Leaders connect vision to demonstrated values rather than aspirational ones. Advanced vision casting includes narrative structure that follows the classic hero's journey pattern. Current state represents the ordinary world. Challenges represent the call to adventure. Proposed changes represent crossing the threshold, and vision represents the transformed world that results from successfully completing the journey. This narrative structure creates psychological engagement that logical arguments alone cannot achieve. One powerful technique is testimonial integration, where you share stories of similar organizations or individuals who have successfully achieved comparable transformations. These stories provide social proof that the vision is achievable while offering concrete examples of what success looks like in practice. Another advanced technique is incremental milestone celebration, where you break long-term vision into shorter-term achievements that provide regular evidence of progress and success. This prevents vision fatigue that occurs when outcomes seem too distant to maintain motivation through current difficulties. Leaders also master the art of vision reinforcement through consistent messaging that connects daily tasks to ultimate objectives. Every meeting, email, and conversation becomes an opportunity to remind people why their current efforts matter and how they contribute to meaningful outcomes. The ultimate goal of vision casting is not just temporary enthusiasm, but sustained commitment that survives setbacks and maintains energy through the inevitable challenges that accompany any significant achievement. Chapter 10: Crisis Communication and Damage Control. Crisis communication is where leadership communication skills are truly tested. When everything is going according to plan, anyone can sound competent and confident. But when unexpected challenges arise, when mistakes are discovered, or when external circumstances threaten important objectives, only true leaders can maintain credibility while navigating toward resolution. The psychology of crisis reveals why most people fail under pressure. When faced with unexpected problems, the human brain activates ancient survival circuits that prioritize immediate safety over strategic thinking. This neurological response triggers fight or flight reactions that narrow focus, reduce cognitive flexibility, and increase emotional reactivity. These responses are designed for physical threats, not complex organizational challenges, which is why they often make crisis situations worse rather than better. Most crisis communication fails because leaders either deny reality, hoping problems will disappear, or panic and share incomplete information that increases anxiety and confusion. Effective crisis communication requires a completely different approach that acknowledges problems honestly while maintaining confidence in your ability to find solutions and implement them effectively. The first principle of crisis communication is immediate acknowledgement with context. When problems arise, stakeholders need to know three things quickly. You are aware of the situation, you understand its significance, and you are taking action to address it. Delays in communication create information vacuums that get filled with speculation, rumors, and worst-case assumptions. Immediate acknowledgement means resisting the natural impulse to gather complete information before saying anything. In crisis situations, partial communication is better than silent communication because silence is interpreted as either ignorance or dishonesty. Leaders provide regular updates even when those updates contain limited new information because consistent communication demonstrates active management of the situation. The second principle is responsibility ownership, without defensive justification. When mistakes contribute to crisis situations, leaders acknowledge these mistakes clearly and completely without making excuses or blaming others. This ownership builds credibility and trust that becomes essential for maintaining support during recovery efforts. Responsibility ownership doesn't mean accepting blame for circumstances beyond your control, but it does mean acknowledging areas where different decisions might have prevented or minimized problems. We should have anticipated this scenario and created contingency plans. That oversight is my responsibility, and we're implementing systems to prevent similar gaps in the future. This accountability demonstrates leadership maturity that increases rather than decreases confidence in your capabilities. The third principle is solution-focused messaging with realistic timelines. After acknowledging problems and accepting appropriate responsibility, leaders shift focus to action plans that address both immediate symptoms and underlying causes. This messaging provides hope and direction while maintaining credibility through realistic timeline estimates. Solution-focused messaging means describing specific steps being taken rather than vague assurances that everything will be fine. We are implementing 3 immediate measures to address this situation. First, we are reallocating resources from Project A to ensure adequate support for the affected systems. Second, we are bringing in external consultants with specialized expertise. Third, we are establishing daily check-ins to monitor progress and adjust our approach based on results. The fourth principle is stakeholder-specific communication adaptation. Different audiences need different types and levels of information during crisis situations. Senior executives need strategic overview and financial implications. Team members need tactical guidance and role clarity. Customers need service, impact information, and timeline expectations. Investors need risk assessment and recovery projections. Stakeholder-specific communication prevents the common mistake of using one-size-fits-all, messaging that overwhelms some audiences with unnecessary detail while leaving others without information they need to make appropriate decisions. Leaders develop multiple versions of crisis updates, tailored to each audience's concerns and decision-making needs. The fifth principle is emotional regulation modeling under pressure. During crisis situations, everyone looks to leaders for emotional cues about how serious the situation is and how confident they should feel about resolution possibilities. Leaders who remain calm, focused, and strategically optimistic help others maintain the emotional stability necessary for effective problem-solving. Emotional regulation modeling doesn't mean false optimism or minimizing genuine concerns. It means demonstrating that you can think clearly and act decisively even when facing difficult circumstances. This emotional stability becomes contagious and helps teams maintain performance levels during challenging periods. Advanced crisis communication includes transparent uncertainty acknowledgement, rather than pretending to know more than you actually know. Effective leaders clearly distinguish between known facts, reasonable assumptions, and unknown variables. We know that the system failure affected approximately 30% of our customer base. We believe the root cause is related to the software update implemented yesterday, but we haven't confirmed this yet. We don't know exactly how long repairs will take, but we're committed to providing updates every 4 hours until resolution is complete. One powerful technique is stakeholder partnership invitation, where you ask for specific support from others rather than trying to handle everything independently. We need your help to minimize customer impact during this repair period. If you could prioritize communication with your highest value accounts and provide them with regular updates, that would allow our technical team to focus entirely on resolution. Another advanced technique is lessons learned integration. where you explicitly describe what changes will be implemented to prevent similar problems in the future. This forward-looking perspective demonstrates that current pain is generating long-term value through improved systems and processes. Leaders also master the art of crisis closure communication that officially marks the end of emergency status, while reinforcing lessons learned and appreciation for everyone's efforts during the difficult period. This closure prevents crisis mentality from becoming permanent organizational culture. The ultimate goal of crisis communication is not just to survive difficult periods, but to emerge from them with stronger relationships, better systems, and increased confidence in your leadership capabilities. Teams that successfully navigate crises together often develop deeper trust and more effective collaboration than existed before the crisis occurred. Chapter 11. Advanced Persuasion and Negotiation Mastery. Negotiation is not about winning or losing. It's about finding solutions that serve everyone's legitimate interests while advancing your strategic objectives. Most people approach negotiations as battles where one side must defeat the other, creating adversarial dynamics that prevent optimal outcomes for anyone involved. Leaders understand that the most powerful negotiations create value for all parties while establishing relationships that support future collaboration. The psychology of negotiation reveals why traditional adversarial approaches fail to achieve sustainable results. When people feel threatened or pressured, their brains activate defensive responses that narrow thinking, reduce creativity, and increase resistance to compromise. These neurological reactions make it nearly impossible to find innovative solutions that could benefit everyone involved. Advanced negotiation begins long before you sit down at the table. The preparation phase determines whether negotiations will be successful or frustrating for everyone involved. This preparation includes understanding not just your own objectives, but the underlying interests, constraints, and motivations of everyone else involved in the process. The first framework for negotiation mastery is comprehensive interest analysis. Most people focus on positions, what they want, rather than interests, why they want it. Positions often appear incompatible, while underlying interests frequently offer opportunities for creative solutions that satisfy everyone's core needs. Interest analysis requires investigating the deeper motivations behind stated positions. If someone insists on a specific timeline, what pressures or opportunities are driving that requirement? If they demand particular contract terms, what risks are they trying to mitigate? Or what benefits are they hoping to secure? Understanding these underlying interests opens up solution possibilities that remain invisible when you only consider surface positions. This analysis must include your own interests as well. Many people enter negotiations with unclear objectives or conflicting internal priorities that prevent them from recognizing good opportunities when they arise. Before any important negotiation, leaders clarify their must-haves, their nice-to-haves, and their deal-breakers, while remaining flexible about how these interests might be satisfied. The second framework is strategic relationship management. Every negotiation exists within the context of ongoing relationships that extend far beyond the immediate transaction. Leaders consider how negotiation strategies will affect long-term working relationships, reputation within professional networks, and future collaboration opportunities. Strategic relationship management means choosing approaches that achieve your objectives while maintaining respect and goodwill with other parties. This doesn't require giving away more than necessary, but it does mean avoiding tactics that create resentment or damage trust. even when such tactics might produce short-term advantages. Relationship management also includes understanding the political and social contexts that influence how other parties can respond to various proposals. Someone might personally prefer your suggested approach, but lack authority to commit without approval from others not directly involved in negotiations. Effective negotiators help others navigate these internal dynamics rather than pressuring them to exceed their actual decision-making authority. The third framework is value creation through option generation. Traditional negotiations assume fixed resources that must be divided between competing parties. Advanced negotiations focus on expanding available value through creative problem-solving that addresses multiple interests simultaneously. Value creation requires moving beyond simple trade-offs toward integrated solutions that provide benefits neither party could achieve independently. This might involve timing adjustments that reduce costs for one party while creating advantages for another. Resource sharing that provides access neither party could afford alone, or creative structuring that addresses different types of interests through different types of benefits. Option generation works best when conducted separately from decision-making. Leaders invest time brainstorming multiple possible approaches before evaluating which options might work best. This separation prevents premature rejection of ideas that initially seem impossible but could become viable through modification or combination with other approaches. The fourth framework is anchoring and framing strategy. The way issues are presented and discussed significantly influences how they are perceived and evaluated by all parties involved. Leaders understand these psychological influences and use them ethically to create frameworks that support mutually beneficial outcomes. Anchoring involves establishing reference points that shape how subsequent information is interpreted. If discussions begin with high-value possibilities, moderate proposals seem more reasonable by comparison. If conversations start with worst-case scenarios, acceptable outcomes seem more attractive. Effective negotiators consciously establish anchors that support productive dialogue rather than allowing anchors to be set randomly or by other parties. Framing involves presenting information in contexts that highlight particular aspects while de-emphasizing others. The same proposal can be framed as an investment in future opportunity or as a cost that reduces current resources. Neither frame is false, but different frames activate different psychological responses that influence decision-making processes. The fifth framework is tactical flexibility with strategic consistency. Successful negotiations often require adjusting approaches based on how other parties respond to different strategies. Leaders develop multiple tactical options while maintaining consistent focus on their core strategic objectives. Tactical flexibility means recognizing when current approaches aren't generating progress and shifting to different methods without abandoning fundamental interests. If logical analysis isn't resonating, try emotional appeals. If detailed proposals aren't working, step back to broader principles. If individual meetings aren't productive, suggest group discussions or external facilitation. Strategic consistency means maintaining clear focus on ultimate objectives even when tactics change dramatically. This consistency prevents you from getting so caught up in negotiation dynamics that you agree to outcomes that don't serve your actual interests, or from becoming so invested in particular approaches that you miss better opportunities. Advanced negotiation techniques include the strategic concession pattern, where you make calculated compromises that encourage reciprocal movement from other parties while signaling your willingness to collaborate toward mutually acceptable solutions. Effective concessions Demonstrate good faith without weakening your negotiating position or setting expectations for disproportionate compromise. Another powerful technique is the alternative scenario presentation, where you help other parties understand the consequences of not reaching agreement versus the benefits of successful collaboration. This isn't threat-making, but rather clear communication about opportunity costs and comparative advantages of different possible outcomes. Leaders also master the art of deadline and urgency management, understanding when time pressure supports negotiation objectives and when it creates counterproductive stress that prevents optimal decision-making. Sometimes negotiations benefit from extended timelines that allow complex solutions to emerge. Other times, quick decision-making prevents overthinking that could complicate straightforward agreements. The ultimate goal of advanced negotiation is creating outcomes that strengthen relationships while achieving objectives that serve everyone's legitimate interests. When negotiations are handled skillfully, they become foundations for expanded collaboration and mutual support that continue generating value long after immediate transactions are completed. Chapter 12. Building unshakable personal authority and presence. Personal authority is not granted by titles, positions, or external validation. It emerges from the intersection of genuine competence, authentic confidence, and consistent character that others can observe and experience through every interaction. Most people seek authority through external achievements while neglecting the internal development that creates the magnetic presence others naturally want to follow. The foundation of personal authority is competence that extends beyond technical skills to include strategic thinking, emotional intelligence, and the ability to create value in complex situations that challenge others. This competence must be demonstrated consistently through actions and results, not just claimed through credentials or promises. Competence development requires obsessive commitment to continuous learning and skill refinement in areas directly related to your leadership objectives. Leaders identify the knowledge gaps and capability limitations that constrain their effectiveness. Then systematically address these weaknesses through deliberate practice and strategic experience acquisition. But competence alone is insufficient for authority. Many highly skilled people lack influence because they cannot communicate their capabilities effectively or because their behavior undermines confidence in their judgment. Personal authority requires translating competence into presence that others can perceive and experience during every interaction. The first element of authority presence is physical confidence that communicates competence through posture, movement, and energy. Your body language broadcasts information about your internal state before you say a single word. Slouched shoulders, fidgeting hands, and averted eye contact signal uncertainty and insecurity, regardless of your actual knowledge or capabilities. Upright posture, purposeful movement, and steady eye contact signal confidence and competence even when discussing unfamiliar topics. Physical confidence is not about intimidation or dominance. It's about occupying space with comfortable authority that invites others into productive interaction rather than creating defensive reactions. This requires developing awareness of your physical presence and consciously adjusting your body language to support your communication objectives. Physical confidence also includes vocal authority that emerges from proper breathing, intentional pacing, and clear articulation. Many people undermine their credibility through vocal patterns that signal nervousness, uncertainty, or lack of conviction. Shallow breathing creates thin, weak vocal tones, Rapid speech suggests anxiety. Mumbled words indicate lack of confidence in your message. The second element of authority presence is intellectual clarity that demonstrates your ability to think through complex problems and communicate insights that others find valuable. This clarity emerges from structured thinking processes that organize information logically and present conclusions that others can understand and apply. Intellectual clarity requires developing frameworks for analyzing situations, identifying patterns, and generating solutions that address root causes rather than surface symptoms. Leaders invest time studying mental models from various disciplines, practicing critical thinking skills, and learning to communicate complex ideas in accessible language that serves their audience's needs. This clarity must extend to decision-making processes that others can observe and evaluate. Authority is built through consistent demonstration of sound judgment over time, especially during situations where decisions have significant consequences and alternative approaches are available. The third element of authority presence is emotional stability that others can depend on, regardless of external circumstances or internal pressures. People follow those they perceive as psychologically resilient and capable of maintaining effectiveness during challenging periods when stress causes others to become reactive or inconsistent. Emotional stability doesn't mean emotional suppression or artificial calmness. It means developing the internal resources to process emotions constructively while maintaining your ability to think clearly, communicate effectively, and make good decisions even when facing difficult circumstances. This stability emerges from self-awareness practices that help you recognize emotional patterns, stress management techniques that prevent overwhelm from compromising your effectiveness, and support systems that provide perspective during difficult periods. Leaders understand that emotional regulation is not a personal luxury, but a professional responsibility to those who depend on their judgment and guidance. The fourth element of authority presence is moral consistency that aligns your actions with stated values even when convenient compromises are available. Nothing destroys authority faster than perceived hypocrisy or self-serving behavior that benefits you at the expense of principles you claim to uphold. Moral consistency requires identifying your core values and making decisions that honor these principles, even when alternative choices might provide short-term advantages. This consistency creates trust that becomes the foundation for influence that extends far beyond formal authority structures. Moral consistency also includes accepting responsibility for mistakes and failures rather than deflecting blame or making excuses that protect your ego while undermining others' confidence in your character. Authority is built through accountability that demonstrates integrity and creates safety for others to acknowledge their own mistakes and learn from failures. The fifth element of authority presence is strategic generosity that provides value to others before asking for anything in return. This generosity might involve sharing knowledge, providing opportunities, offering support, or creating connections that benefit others' professional development and personal success. Strategic generosity is not manipulation or transaction-based relationship building. It's authentic investment in others' success that creates goodwill and demonstrates your commitment to collective outcomes rather than purely personal advancement. This approach builds networks of mutual support that amplify your influence and create opportunities that individual effort alone could not generate. Advanced authority development requires understanding that presence is contextual. The behaviors that create authority in creative environments differ from those that work in analytical settings. The communication styles that build influence with senior executives differ from those that resonate with frontline employees. Leaders develop adaptability that allows them to maintain authentic presence while adjusting their approach to different audiences and situations. One crucial aspect of authority building is managing the paradox of confidence and humility. Authority requires projecting confidence in your capabilities while remaining open to feedback, new information, and alternative perspectives. This balance prevents the arrogance that alienates others while avoiding the self-deprecation that undermines credibility. Another important element is reputation management through consistent behavior over extended periods. Authority is built through accumulated evidence of competence, character, and judgment that others observe directly or hear about through credible sources. This reputation becomes a form of social capital that creates opportunities and amplifies influence across multiple contexts. Leaders also understand that authority must be earned repeatedly through consistent performance rather than assumed based on past achievements. Each interaction provides opportunities to strengthen or weaken others' confidence in your capabilities and judgment. This means treating every conversation, decision, and behavior as an investment in or withdrawal from your authority account. The ultimate goal of personal authority development is creating presence that naturally draws others toward collaboration and influence that serves collective success rather than personal ego. When authority is built on genuine competence and authentic character, it becomes a resource that benefits everyone involved rather than a tool for personal advantage. Chapter 13. Leading through strategic questions and active listening. The most powerful leadership tool is not making statements, but asking questions that unlock thinking, reveal insights, and guide others toward solutions they might not have discovered independently. Most people believe leadership requires having all the answers, but true leaders understand that the right questions often create more value than the perfect answers. Strategic questioning operates on the principle that people are more committed to conclusions they reach themselves than to solutions imposed by others. When you tell someone what to do, you're asking them to trust your judgment. When you help them discover what to do, you're developing their judgment while creating ownership of both the process and the outcome. The psychology of questions reveals why they are so powerful for influence and development. Questions activate the analytical centers of the brain, forcing people to process information more deeply than they do when passively receiving answers. This deeper processing creates stronger understanding, better retention, and more creative problem-solving than results from being told what to think. Questions also demonstrate respect for others' intelligence and capabilities. When you ask thoughtful questions, you're communicating that you value their perspective and believe they have insights worth exploring. This respect creates psychological safety that encourages honesty, creativity, and genuine engagement in problem-solving processes. But not all questions are equally powerful. Random questions create confusion and frustration. Leading questions manipulate rather than explore. Superficial questions waste time without generating insight. Strategic questions are carefully crafted to achieve specific objectives while genuinely seeking valuable information. The first category of strategic questions is awareness-building questions that help people see situations more clearly and completely. These questions expand perspective by directing attention to aspects of problems or opportunities that might otherwise remain invisible. Awareness-building questions include: what patterns do you notice when you step back and look at this situation over time? What assumptions are we making that might not be accurate? What would someone completely outside this industry notice about our approach? What are we not seeing because it's too familiar or obvious? These questions prevent tunnel vision and groupthink by encouraging broader, more objective analysis. They help people move beyond their initial impressions toward deeper understanding that reveals options and solutions that weren't apparent during superficial examination. The second category is assumption-challenging questions that surface and examine the beliefs, expectations, and mental models that shape how people interpret situations and evaluate options. Many poor decisions result from unexamined assumptions that seem so obviously true that they're never questioned. Assumption-challenging questions include: what would have to be true for this approach to succeed? What evidence do we have that supports this belief? What might happen if the opposite of our assumption were actually accurate? What are we taking for granted that might not be as certain as it appears? These questions create cognitive flexibility that opens up new possibilities for action. They prevent overconfidence and premature closure, while encouraging more thorough analysis that leads to better decisions. The third category is possibility. Expanding questions that help people see options and opportunities beyond their initial ideas. When facing challenges, most people quickly fixate on the first solution that comes to mind, rather than exploring the full range of available approaches. Possibility-expanding questions include: what else could we try? What would we do if our current approach were impossible? What options would we consider if we had unlimited resources? What would success look like if it were completely different from what we're currently imagining? These questions prevent premature commitment to suboptimal solutions, while encouraging creative thinking that often leads to breakthrough approaches that wouldn't emerge through conventional problem-solving processes. The fourth category is priority-clarifying questions that help people identify what matters most when facing multiple competing demands or conflicting objectives. Without clear priorities, people waste time and energy on activities that don't advance their most important goals. Priority-clarifying questions include: if you could only accomplish one thing, what would create the most value? What are the consequences of delaying action on this issue? What would happen if we did nothing at all? What outcomes would you be unwilling to compromise, regardless of other pressures? These questions force difficult trade-off decisions that are often avoided through wishful thinking that assumes all objectives can be achieved simultaneously without resource constraints or timeline pressures. The fifth category is action-generating questions that move conversations from analysis to implementation by helping people identify specific next steps and commitment levels. Many discussions produce insights without creating change because they don't transition from understanding to action. Action-generating questions include: what's the smallest step we could take to begin moving forward? What would need to happen for you to feel confident about implementing this approach? What obstacles do you anticipate? And how might we address them proactively? What support would you need to be successful? These questions transform good intentions into concrete commitments while addressing implementation barriers before they prevent progress. Active listening is the essential complement to strategic questioning. Questions without listening become interrogation rather than exploration. Listening without questions becomes passive reception rather than active learning. The combination creates powerful learning conversations that benefit everyone involved. Active listening requires managing your internal dialogue while focusing completely on understanding what others are actually saying, rather than preparing your response to what you think they're saying. Most people listen selectively, hearing only information that confirms their existing beliefs while missing insights that could change their thinking. Advanced listening includes emotional listening that pays attention to feelings and concerns, underlying factual content, pattern listening that notices themes and connections across different parts of conversations, and contextual listening that considers how personal and professional pressures might be influencing what people choose to share or withhold. Strategic listening also involves knowing when to ask follow-up questions that deepen understanding versus when to remain silent and allow people to continue processing their thoughts without interruption. This judgment comes from reading verbal and nonverbal cues that indicate whether someone has finished their thought or is still working through complex ideas. One powerful advanced technique is reflective questioning, where you help people examine their own thinking processes by asking about how they reached certain conclusions or what factors most influenced their perspectives. This metacognitive approach helps people become better thinkers while providing you with deeper insight into their reasoning. Another advanced approach is hypothetical questioning, where you explore different scenarios to test the robustness of proposed solutions and identify potential problems before they occur in reality. These questions help people think through implementation challenges and develop contingency plans that increase success probability. Leaders also master the art of timing their questions for maximum impact. Some questions are most powerful at the beginning of conversations to establish productive frameworks. Others work best in the middle to redirect unproductive discussions. Still, others are most effective at the end to ensure clarity and commitment. The ultimate goal of strategic questioning and active listening is developing others' thinking capabilities while gathering the insights needed to make better collective decisions. This approach creates learning relationships that continue generating value long after specific conversations end. Chapter 14. The Science of Charisma and Magnetic Communication. Charisma is not a mysterious personality trait that some people possess and others lack. It's a learnable set of communication behaviors that create strong, positive emotional responses in others. When you understand the psychological and neurological mechanisms that generate charismatic attraction, you can develop these capabilities systematically, rather than hoping they emerge naturally. The science of charisma reveals that magnetic attraction results from specific patterns of verbal and nonverbal behavior that activate reward centers in other people's brains. These patterns signal competence, confidence, and genuine interest in others' well-being, creating neurochemical responses that feel like inspiration, trust, and motivation to engage more deeply. Most people misunderstand charisma as either manipulation or inborn talent. Neither perspective is accurate. Charisma based on manipulation creates short-term attraction but long-term resentment when people realize they're being used for someone else's benefit. Charisma viewed as talent remains undeveloped because people don't invest effort in improving what they believe can't be changed. Authentic charisma emerges from genuine competence combined with sincere interest in creating value for others. This combination generates magnetic attraction that serves everyone involved, rather than exploiting others for personal gain. The key is developing specific skills that allow your authentic value to be perceived and experienced by others. The first component of charismatic communication is presence that communicates complete attention and engagement with the current moment and the people sharing it. Most people broadcast distraction through their body language, eye contact patterns, and verbal responses, creating experiences of partial attention that feel unsatisfying to others. Charismatic presence requires eliminating all forms of multitasking during interpersonal interactions. This means putting away devices, stopping internal mental conversations about other topics, and focusing completely on understanding and responding to the people in front of you. This level of attention is so rare that it creates immediate positive impact. Physical presence includes posture that signals confidence without arrogance, eye contact that demonstrates interest without intensity, and facial expressions that match the emotional context of conversations. These non-verbal behaviors must be congruent with verbal content to create authentic, charismatic impact. The second component is emotional expressiveness that allows others to experience your personality, enthusiasm, and genuine reactions rather than presenting neutral or guarded emotional facades. Charismatic people allow appropriate emotions to show through their voice tone, facial expressions, and gesture patterns. Emotional expressiveness doesn't mean dramatic or artificial behavior. It means allowing your authentic emotional responses to be visible when they add value to interactions. Excitement about opportunities, concern about problems, satisfaction with achievements, and disappointment with setbacks all become more compelling when expressed appropriately. This expressiveness must be calibrated to social contexts and cultural norms. What feels engaging in creative brainstorming sessions might seem inappropriate in formal presentations. What works in casual conversations might not work in serious decision-making meetings. Charismatic leaders develop sensitivity to contextual requirements while maintaining authentic emotional availability. The third component is verbal fluency that demonstrates your ability to articulate ideas clearly, tell engaging stories, and use language that creates vivid mental images in others' minds. Charismatic communication goes beyond basic clarity to create experiences that people remember and want to share with others. Verbal fluency includes storytelling capabilities that transform abstract concepts into concrete experiences through narrative structure, sensory details, and emotional arc. Stories engage multiple areas of the brain simultaneously, creating stronger impact than logical arguments or statistical presentations alone. Advanced verbal fluency also includes metaphor and analogy usage that helps people understand complex ideas through comparison to familiar experiences. These linguistic tools make difficult concepts accessible while demonstrating creative thinking that others find intellectually stimulating. The fourth component is genuine curiosity about other people's perspectives, experiences, and expertise. Charismatic leaders ask thoughtful questions, listen carefully to answers, and demonstrate that they value what others have to contribute. This curiosity creates experiences of being interesting rather than just finding others interesting. Genuine curiosity requires overcoming the self-focus that drives most social interactions, where people spend mental energy preparing their next comment rather than fully understanding what others are sharing. Charismatic people reverse this pattern by becoming genuinely interested in learning from every interaction. This curiosity must extend beyond superficial topics to include understanding others' motivations, challenges, aspirations, and unique perspectives. When people feel that you're genuinely interested in understanding them as individuals, They become more interested in engaging with you and supporting your objectives. The fifth component is optimistic energy that communicates possibility, hope, and confidence in positive outcomes without ignoring real challenges or legitimate concerns. Charismatic leaders help others see opportunities and solutions while acknowledging obstacles and difficulties. Optimistic energy is not false positivity or naive cheerfulness. It's realistic optimism based on genuine competence and past evidence that challenges can be overcome through intelligent strategy and sustained effort. This optimism becomes contagious because it's grounded in actual capability rather than wishful thinking. This energy must be sustainable rather than manic. Charismatic leaders maintain consistent positive energy over extended periods rather than cycling between artificial highs and inevitable crashes. This consistency creates reliability that others can depend on during both good times and difficult circumstances. Advanced charisma development includes understanding how to adapt your communication style to different personality types while maintaining your authentic core. Some people respond best to high-energy enthusiasm, while others prefer calm confidence. Some appreciate detailed analysis, while others want big-picture vision. Charismatic leaders develop versatility in their communication approach. One crucial aspect of charisma is vulnerability that demonstrates your humanity and creates permission for others to be authentic rather than perfect. This vulnerability must be strategic rather than overwhelming, sharing appropriate challenges and uncertainties that help others relate to you as a real person rather than an untouchable figure. Another important element is humor that creates positive emotional experiences and demonstrates your ability to find lightness even in serious situations. Effective humor must be inclusive rather than divisive, clever rather than crude, and spontaneous rather than forced. The ability to help others laugh and smile creates memorable interactions that build relationship foundations. Charismatic leaders also master the art of recognition and appreciation that helps others feel valued and significant. This recognition must be specific rather than generic, focusing on particular contributions or qualities that demonstrate you've paid attention to their individual efforts and characteristics. The ultimate goal of charismatic communication is creating experiences that others find energizing, inspiring, and memorable while genuinely serving their interests and supporting their success. When charisma is built on authentic competence and sincere care for others, it becomes a leadership tool that creates value for everyone involved. Chapter 15. Your Leadership Communication Transformation Implementation Plan. Everything you've learned means nothing without implementation. Knowledge without action is just sophisticated entertainment that makes you feel good temporarily, but changes nothing permanently. Your transformation from average communicator to magnetic leader requires systematic practice, consistent application, and ruthless self-assessment that forces continuous improvement. Most people consume leadership content like entertainment, enjoying the insights while never doing the difficult work of changing established patterns. They read about communication strategies, feel inspired by possibilities, then return to exactly the same behaviors that have kept them invisible and ineffective. You cannot think your way to leadership presence. You must practice your way there. The neuroscience of habit change reveals why transformation requires more than good intentions. Your current communication patterns are deeply embedded in your neural networks through thousands of repetitions. These patterns operate automatically without conscious control, which is why you often hear yourself saying things you didn't intend or responding in ways you know aren't optimal. Changing these patterns requires deliberate practice that rewires your brain through consistent repetition of new behaviors. This rewiring takes time, energy, and patience, because your nervous system initially resists changes that feel unfamiliar or uncomfortable. Your brain interprets new behaviors as threats to established systems, creating internal resistance that must be overcome through persistence. But here's what most people don't understand. The difficulty of change is temporary, while the benefits are permanent. The first few weeks of practicing new communication patterns feel awkward and require conscious effort. But once these patterns become neurologically embedded, they operate automatically and feel natural. You literally become a different person who communicates with unconscious competence that others experience as natural leadership presence. The first phase of your transformation is baseline assessment that honestly evaluates your current communication strengths and weaknesses. This assessment must be brutally objective because self-deception will sabotage improvement efforts. You cannot fix problems you don't acknowledge or develop skills you think you already have. Baseline assessment includes recording yourself during typical conversations to evaluate your actual communication patterns versus your perceived patterns. Most people are shocked when they hear themselves speaking because their self-perception doesn't match external reality. You might think you speak with confidence while actually using tentative language patterns. You might believe you listen well while actually interrupting frequently. This assessment should also include gathering feedback from trusted colleagues or friends who can provide honest perspectives on how your communication affects others. Ask specific questions about your strengths and areas for improvement rather than general requests for feedback that typically produce polite but useless responses. The second phase is priority selection that identifies the 3 most important communication skills to develop first. Attempting to improve everything simultaneously guarantees failure because your mental resources become too dispersed to create meaningful change in any area. Focus creates transformation, while scattered effort creates frustration. Priority selection should be based on impact analysis that identifies which improvements would create the most significant changes in your effectiveness and influence. If you struggle with confidence, developing certainty architecture might provide the highest return on investment. If you avoid difficult conversations, conflict resolution mastery might transform your relationships and results. Consider both professional and personal contexts when selecting priorities. The communication skills that serve you well in meetings might not work in family relationships. The approaches that create authority with peers might not work with senior executives. Choose priorities that address your most important relationship and achievement objectives. The third phase is skill development through deliberate practice that breaks complex communication behaviors into specific components that can be practiced and improved systematically. This practice must be more intensive and focused than casual conversation, because only deliberate practice creates the neural changes required for permanent improvement. Deliberate practice includes role-playing difficult scenarios before they occur in real life. Practicing specific language patterns until they become automatic, and working with coaches or practice partners who can provide immediate feedback and accountability. This practice should feel challenging and sometimes uncomfortable, because comfort zones don't produce growth. Create specific practice schedules that dedicate time to communication skill development. rather than hoping improvement will happen through normal daily interactions. Professional athletes don't improve through games alone. They improve through focused practice sessions that isolate specific skills for intensive development. The fourth phase is real-world application that systematically implements new skills in increasingly challenging situations. Start with low-stakes conversations where mistakes won't create significant consequences. Then gradually apply new approaches to more important interactions as your competence and confidence increase. Real-world application requires courage to try new approaches even when you're not sure they'll work perfectly. You will make mistakes, have awkward moments, and sometimes feel like you're performing rather than being authentic. This discomfort is normal and temporary, indicating that you're stretching beyond your current capabilities toward new levels of effectiveness. Document your experiences through journaling or reflection sessions that analyze what worked well, what could be improved, and what you learned about yourself and others through each interaction. This reflection accelerates learning and helps you adjust your approach based on real feedback rather than assumptions. The fifth phase is mastery integration that makes advanced communication skills feel natural and automatic rather than conscious and effortful. This integration happens through consistent practice over months rather than weeks, as complex skills require extended time to become neurologically embedded. Mastery integration includes developing situational awareness that allows you to adapt your communication approach based on context, audience, and objectives without losing authenticity or effectiveness. You learn to read environments quickly and adjust your style while maintaining your core communication principles. Advanced practitioners also develop teaching capabilities that allow them to help others improve their communication skills. Teaching forces deeper understanding and provides additional practice opportunities while creating value for others and building your reputation as a communication leader. The final element of transformation is sustainability systems that ensure continued improvement rather than gradual regression to old patterns. Without ongoing development, communication skills atrophy just like physical fitness. Leaders create habits and systems that maintain and expand their capabilities throughout their careers. Sustainability includes regular self-assessment that identifies new areas for improvement as your responsibilities and contexts evolve. The communication skills that serve you as an individual contributor may be insufficient for management roles. The approaches that work in your current industry might not work if you change fields. Create accountability partnerships with others who are also committed to communication excellence, providing mutual support and feedback that maintains motivation for continued growth. Join professional organizations or learning groups that expose you to new ideas and higher standards of communication effectiveness. Most importantly, maintain the mindset that communication mastery is a lifelong journey rather than a destination you reach and then stop pursuing. The most magnetic leaders never stop refining their abilities because they understand that their communication skills determine their capacity to create value for others and achieve meaningful objectives. Your transformation begins the moment you start practicing rather than just consuming. Every conversation becomes an opportunity to apply what you've learned. Every interaction becomes a chance to build your leadership presence. Every challenge becomes training for greater influence and impact. The question is not whether you can become a magnetic leader who commands respect and creates extraordinary results through communication mastery. The question is whether you will commit to the deliberate practice required to make this transformation reality. Your future depends on your answer to that question, and that answer will be revealed through your actions over the next 90 days.